Hi, Tom. Good morning.
Hi, Sana. Um, Worrying that we're the only two here. Do we have the right link?
This is the only link, Tom. There
Yeah.
is other link,
Yeah. Okay.
and it's 9:01. We'll see for next couple of minutes.
Yep.
Tall, I think it's 9:04. We can get started. Hi, Wim, Lok, um, Vara. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can.
perfect. So I'm assuming that Bernard has been actively showing up on these working sessions, but somehow I haven't seen him diving in yet. Recording is in progress. We can, if you guys feel we have enough people on the bridge, we can get started. I won't be able to attend the Thursday session as I'm taking some time off at that time. So I did do some work, and I wanted to discuss with you guys and make sure that everybody else follows by sharing those documents on the stack.
So to be honest, I wonder if we have enough people to really make progress. It's up to you, Sana.
Yeah, Tall, what I'm thinking is that instead of doing 1 full hour session, we can do a short session. Just with you guys, I can share what I have been working on, and then we can wrap up. And I think we'll reconvene in the next SIG meeting on Monday. I don't know if Kaushik is back or if somebody can take care of the Thursday meeting, but I'm taking off on Thursday.
Okay, yeah, if you could shoot an email to Kaushik to verify.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay, it's gonna be his first day back, so I don't know if he said 16th inclusive, which means up until
right,
Wednesday he's
right.
off,
He
right?
should be around, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'll circle back with him internally. If he can take on the Thursday meeting, I'll let him continue. But for what about this one? Do you guys want to have a quick sync up, or you guys want to wrap up for now and then see if you guys can meet Thursday?
If you have some update on your side, then I would be happy to hear it.
Okay. Okay. So the quick update, all. Since you said we should actually include a diagram in the requirements document, and I was thinking on those lines. Maybe the best thing you can do right now is to give me feedback to which degree should we capture the details on the diagram on the requirement. So let me share my screen and see what I was thinking.
Sure. Yeah, and by the way, somebody shared on Slack, I think it was Ronnie, shared a LinkedIn post that somebody really commented and asked questions about our northbound APIs. So
yeah, that's very important. We need to
yeah,
get to the details of northbound
correct.
APIs. Okay, do you see this diagram on my screen right now? I don't know if I should make it bigger, or maybe I should have actually pasted this in a slide to view better.
If you could just make it a little bit bigger, that would help.
Is
Great,
that
thank you.
better?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was trying to establish a connection of Nephew with the rest of the brownfield world, how we are using and how the other service providers could be using Nephew in the short term. So Nephew is essentially doing infrastructure automation. It's doing CNF deployment and CNF configuration lifecycle management and all that. Now, two things coming out of the Nephew as the product is evolving are maybe collection of APIs and SDKs and a growing variety of blueprints. For now, it's 5G core that could be reused, consumed with extensions for other commercial versions. Now, a newer version, we could be getting the ORAN video VCU template. I don't know if the open source version has the video VCUs, but eventually we probably have a growing ecosystem of these blueprints, which could be a part of the open source code and that can be consumed by service providers with their SDKs and extensions, customer specific extensions as it's growing. And it's still evolving. We don't know what else is coming. Maybe there is a GUI. Maybe what else goes in the code at all, it's all evolving. I'm just assuming the two big things would be APIs and maybe the templates. What do you think?
I think the blueprints that we have all have to do with open source components, such as Free5GC or others that we will add.
But that would be the open source version. Okay, that would be the Nephew. What we are putting in our open source code is the Nephew model of the templates that already existed in open source.
Well, it complements it, right? Where, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't replace the existing packaging. It's more about making the packaging compatible with Nephew.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we are offering that to our community as the Nephew version of those templates and the blueprints, which is becoming a part of what we are sharing with the community. So I'm trying to describe in this little box everything about Nephew. Like, what is it that we are giving to the rest of the world that has to be consumed by the brownfield or the other broader ecosystem? So my assumption is if I look at Nephew as a box from outside, I'm looking at two things, maybe the GUI I'm interacting with and the APIs that I can consume northbound, southbound, and I have a variety of blueprints, which I could look at and maybe use my extensions and use it to my context.
Right. You know, there's a balance that we're striking, or trying to strike. We haven't quite achieved this in R1, but I think many of us think of Nephew as a platform.
It's not.
It's not, you're saying?
I believe it's not. I believe it's a concept that exists in Kubernetes, and Nephew is enabling us to use that concept through its capabilities. Like whatever this community is doing, the APIs are given or the SDKs are given is to enabling this community to reuse an existing model that existed in Kubernetes. Correct me if I'm wrong. That has been my understanding.
Right. I understand that the same way. I would call that a platform because what you described is something on which you can build.
Correct.
So if it's something on which you can build, that's something that I would call a platform. But Nephew also includes reference implementations. And some of them might be useful, right? In production environments even, I don't know, right? So, and I assume that the reference implementations will keep growing. For example, as we have Helm support, it might be easier to contribute Nefio packaging for existing production level network functions. So I assume that those parts will be useful, but for Nefio R2, this is where the question is rather open, because we want to focus on north, south, east, and westbound APIs, and then suddenly Nefio is no longer just a platform, but can really interact as a component. But that's something that I think you're drawing here, right?
Right.
What you're drawing here right now is Nefio not as a platform, but Nefio as a component, and that does make sense.
It's just the way we look at things. So if you look at the things from a much bigger picture, it's a component fitting into the rest of the ecosystem. But if you zoom into Nefio from your product perspective, it does look like a platform and has a lot of components internally within that. I think it's either way. It's correct. Right? In the grand scheme of things, Nephew has to actually intersect with the rest of the components. So for example, in Teles, if I have to adopt Nephew, a lot of people are asking me questions about what would happen to the existing service orchestration investments? What is happening to the network slicing? What is happening to SMO? Is it that disruptive that it would change everything? And I always go back to them and I explain, it's just going to make everything better. It's just going to bring in more efficiencies in the lowest level where we are deploying the functions to the cloud and we are managing the cloud, just enabling the upper layers of our automation with higher efficiencies than how we were managing it with just Helm alone before. And that creates a little bit of understanding. But what I was trying to do in this diagram is to show where Nephew fits in that ecosystem. So some ambitious people in the community believe that Nephew is going to basically eventually become a component of everything. I believe short-term Nephew sits here. And I would wait for you all to basically comment on this, if this understanding is correct.
Yeah, I think this is part of the picture. I think there are more connections, right? You've really focused on north and south. The east and west is interesting, right? You know, what would be the connections there? It's interesting to see here that Nefio is sandwiched in between ORAN North and ORAN South, right? So
correct.
I think that's a very interesting part of the narrative. You know, I think if we, you know, there are just so many things to talk about here. ETSI, ORAN, southbound, there are cluster APIs and crossplane and other infrastructure management in Kubernetes. So there are three different universes here of standards. There's ETSI, there's ORAN, and there's Kubernetes.
Correct.
The Kubernetes ecosystem. So I think that's, and even on the side, you're kind of adding, you know, GitOps as well, right? So that's also something that can be thought of. Although we have our own GitOps universe, we don't really interact with other GitOps approaches. Porch has its own philosophy, right? But the question is, could we interact with other GitOps? So there are east-west potentials as well. But I think, you know, because this is part of R2 planning, right? So on the one hand, yeah, we want to show all the potentials, but I think in terms of really focusing on the next few months, it seems very natural to me that ORAN should be the focus. There's just so much attention and interest on it, and I think that's a place where we can get some leverage. There's effort being done right now, as I mentioned. A few companies are trying to give a proposal to make the IMS interface more declarative, and that means absolutely more friendly for Nefio. And we're doing that effort with Nefio in mind. So it's very oriented around that. So I wonder if using the current momentum for us to, yeah, we should have this diagram to show all the potentials, but I think maybe zeroing in more on ORAN and creating a use case that, limited as it will be, that we can actually achieve in R2.
I completely agree. We can focus on O1 and O2 APIs because we are dealing with both network function, lifecycle management, and infrastructure, FMPM, and lifecycle management through the Nephew automation, which means that there's going to be a time where we can participate in exposing O1, O2 interfaces to the upstream system, that is SMO, which consumes these APIs. And you could say that Nephew could be a part of the SMO, because if you look at, I didn't zoom into the SMO itself, but within the SMO, there is a GVNF manager and the NFPO component. So Nephew is essentially replacing the GVNFM component of the of that block in the SMO block. And it's something within Nephew is internally going to consume the O1, O2 interfaces, the near time rig or the far rig. So that's interesting. And I'm not saying that we are all doing it R1. I'm saying that we can consider including a roadmap of the APIs, how we are gradually building that. So every time we are developing a new use case or improving a previous use case or building on it. So what we did in the pre-5GC, we're extending that to RAN. Now we would have a VCU, VDU template included in our library. We would have maybe an end-to-end call where we are using the more advanced configurations in the AMF, SMF, UPF, and the RAN components. So we probably advance on the configurations one step further to show a demo of an end-to-end call through the core and the RAN. And at the same time, we have the capabilities to expose some of that through those APIs upstream to the systems that could actually consume that use case. So if I were to put Nephew in production this year or like mid next year, how can I use Nephew? How can I deploy a 5G core using Nephew? And that makes it very easy for me that I would probably need some plugin here to be able to intersect with Nephew and consume that within my existing brownfield. So if I have a product here, which is capable of building a plugin to Nephew APIs, it would just expect some sort of APIs, even if it's not standards-based, to be able to interact with the functionality and capabilities of Nephew. So I think a roadmap for APIs would be very good to express the capabilities. And it doesn't have to be all in R2. It could be an incremental plot or block to say that these APIs are coming in R2, these are coming in R3. Eventually, we would have at least a vision.
Yeah, I think you're right about all of that. You know, you did mention GVNFM. That's a very big topic in itself.
Correct.
And I think that the notion of a GVNFM is something I think should be discussed as its own topic at some point. I think people have mixed ideas whether Nephew could finally be the GVNFM that we were all hoping for Kubernetes specifically, or if it's not an ambition we should go towards, because I think it is possible, but it means changing some of the scope and focus involving other technologies that we really haven't talked about, like netconf and 3GPP interfaces. And it's something that we can definitely do. It's tricky. As you know, there's it changes in a way the relationship between telcos and vendors right now, because a lot of that goes through VNFMs, right? That's part of the business connection. So should Nephew intervene in that area? It could, right? Kubernetes changes the game, right? Kubernetes is an orchestrator. So suddenly we have a platform that is itself a place where you can install operators that do a lot of the work that GVNFMs do right now, but they do, sorry, VNFMs do right now, but they do it separately from the platform. So we can embed things in the platform. But yeah, let's talk about that, I suggest, as its own topic, possibly beyond R2.
Let's do that. It's one of the topics for discussion, and I think I have a very strong view on that, Tol.
I know.
You know that, and I'm not repeating myself. Okay, yeah. That's the only way Nephew could be successful. If it's not penetrating in that space, I don't see where it fits and how it brings value to me. Like I need that discussion to happen, at least from a Nephew community perspective. I need to see the direction where we are heading and how this could be useful for us eventually.
Oh, we have two hands up from Vish and Bala. I don't know which one is first, but
Vish is first.
Bala, do you want to go first?
Vish, you raised your hand first. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Sana, you were mentioning APIs, right? In Kubernetes, the APIs are, I mean, again, correct me if my understanding is wrong to the community, right? I see at this point of time that the two CRDs we have, package variant and package variant set, as generic CRDs. And I think those are the APIs that can be used at this point of time.
Correct.
You guys agree?
I think so.
Okay.
If that's the plan, that Nephew would just extend the Kubernetes APIs, we could just document that. And then when a lot of people are asking questions for the northbound APIs, what is it that we can consume? We could just say we could use Kubernetes APIs that are naturally expressed as we develop these new CRDs.
Yeah, but in general, in Kubernetes, we have resources, right? Defined, like pods, deployments, and all the stuff. Those are all kinds, right? Is APIs, is what I think. So it'll always be those resources. And in our case, it'll always be the custom resource CRDs will be the APIs. Is that understanding? Is that what everybody has an understanding, or is it just me? And am I wrong in that understanding?
I'll quickly take it and let others chime in as well. You're not wrong. I think every time we develop something in Kubernetes, we have naturally exposed API for that. Then there is a lot of discussion about northbound APIs. I think it's not about just the Kubernetes APIs. Probably the community is expecting us to wrap those APIs in certain compliant formats that are actually accepted by HC as well. So for example, back to Toll's point, if Nephew has to behave as a GVNFM, then to be able to intersect with the rest of the ecosystem, we probably need to expose those APIs, the ones that are naturally expressed by those CRDs, wrapped up in the SOL 003 format, so that we can consume those resources and can build an NSG out of it and can actually create a service out of it through existing brownfield NSCO and the HC model. Maybe that's what the community is looking for, the answers, or maybe the direction to not just native Kubernetes APIs, but also the standard-based APIs.
Yeah, so in my mind, I'm still thinking
okay.
That there will be orchestrators out there, right? And there will be deployments which are heterogeneous. When I say that, it means it will be there might be still a mix of OpenStack VMs, VMware VMs, and also Kubernetes. These orchestrators probably know how to be able to like talk to each of this, and they will have their, let's say, when you're talking about network services, which is a composition, some of those components could be deployed on some on VMware, some on OpenStack, and a couple of them on Kubernetes, because I don't think everything is now containerized.
Yes.
It might exist is what I'm thinking. And that is where, when such a heterogeneous deployment is happening, then you need a way to be able to make your life easy in the orchestrator, for example, to be able to talk to Kubernetes. And that is where the CRDs exposed by Nephew comes in handy to be able to help with that, is my understanding, limited understanding.
Absolutely correct. I think from a service provider's point of view, we would have some composite orchestrators managing our multi-cloud deployments, managing our transport orchestration, interacting with the SMO for the RAN automations, and even RAN itself is going through evolutionary phases. A component of RAN is in the physical world, a component of that is in the OpenStack, and now a phase of that is coming in the containerized world in the form of CNFs, VCUs, VDUs, which is the third generation at the moment. And even that one is called either vRAN or ORAN, as different vendors are coming up with their own variants there. So there is a lot of non-Kubernetes mix in the ecosystem for which a composite orchestrator will exist for a very long time.
Yeah.
And for Nephew to be able to intersect with that world, it's important that it has the right level of APIs for creating that end-to-end picture and be useful in that brownfield.
Okay. Yeah.
The soonest, yeah.
Yeah. So also I remember the term GVNFM was thrown around, right? So I know when we did Tacker and OpenStack, we had the EAT as a resource orchestrator, right? So it was very easy to actually build like a generic VNFM. But then when it came to the different VNFs, the specialized VNFs, still you needed to actually have that knowledge basically where that specialized VNFM had to be there. And those VNFM in the virtualization world, the VM world, could also be packaged as a VM too. And I'm thinking even in Kubernetes, even though we give a generic way of actually being able to deploy containerized workload, and in this case, network functions, and as part of one of the components, one of the containers could also be this specific VNFM that can actually go off and be able to configure the, right? So even some of the vendors that have specific VNFMs, probably they're going to be able to package them as a container as well.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, good to know that that's your understanding as well. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Those were my comments and trying to make sure I got some of this right. Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Any other comments, questions? I can't see the see the raised hand.
Yeah, Sarah, this Para had raised hands. For the had two fundamental questions. One is almost like a statement, and I'm going to ask a question. Statement is the grand aim, the bigger aim of Nephew used to be beyond telco and not just to serve telco use cases. It could be telco or generic edge cases or even beyond, maybe enterprise use cases as well. So that's plays a picture where exactly Nephew fits into some of the things we are discussing about. Can it be part of some of the components of URAN OEM? Or could it be part of that? Could it be a separate component? So given the grand vision of Nephew, we should also consider the generic nature to it, and then probably we should consider architecture for it, because its dream is beyond telco. That's one thing I wanted to say. Second question to you is, since specifically to you, Sana, or anybody else who are from the telcos here, is in their existing LAN and core setups, do they have integrations? Forget Nephew for now. Let's say Nephew is maybe something proprietary that you use, the layer that you mentioned for Nephew for. But for the NFO service orchestration piece and the ORAN orchestrator, so do the telcos use something like that? Or do they use something very proprietary, not use anything related to ORAN SMO, for example?
You're saying in the context of Nephew's precursor, like if there is no Nephew, what is it that we are using there in place of Nephew?
No. I'm asking layer above that. Layer above that, the ORAN orchestrator SMO is there, right? Or
right.
There is you have something similar for task on the left side too.
Right.
So what I'm asking is, do the telcos use something like that today, or do they use something completely proprietary?
Every telco has its own story. We are using commercial products for NFEO. I have been in touch with other telcos. Some are creating their own in-house development of that composite orchestrator because they couldn't find one version that would fit for all requirements. So similar to the concept of ONAP or OSM, there is something that everyone's using internally, but some are using commercial products and some are using in-house developments. For example, we are using a very in-house version of the transport orchestrator. But for the core and cloud, we are using a commercial solution for NFEO that supports Tosca.
Okay, but they do adhere to the standards.
Correct. They've completely adhered to the standards. They have standard-based APIs exposed all around. So for the generic DNF manager, they expose SOL 003 APIs. For the network slicing, they expose SOL 005 APIs. They also support TM Forum APIs. They also support the APIs towards the inventory, which is again TM Forum APIs. They have lots of APIs, not standards-based, that interact with the tooling. For example, any GitOps tools that we have, the solutions can interact with that. For example, we can store templates, they can trigger a pipeline from there. And then there are also some policy and lifecycle management capabilities within that. And some interesting things are also happening in the commercial products right now, which could be very interesting for the evolution of Nephew. And I was going to talk about that next to Tall. So currently, we are, of course, focusing on the R2, and R2 has a very, very discrete scope. I'm not talking specifically about R2 right now. We already made a decision, a kind of direction that we need to include the RAN components, focus a little bit more on the configurations, improve our infrastructure control and interaction from Nephew a little bit better. Could be that's it, the scope for R2. eventually, as the evolution of the APIs and the blueprints is happening, I was wondering if there could be a stage where we could generate most of our blueprints through a user-defined GUI. Like a lot of these products that I'm working on here generates Tosca like that for us. And now we are exploring our possibilities of generating that Tosca template through AI. So it's just an advanced question, Tol, futuristic. If you could give me your view on that.
I don't have a specific view. I think we have a lot of options, right? It's in a way, I think these things should be decoupled from the core of Nephio because APIs evolve, right? And the core of what we're doing evolves in its own way, functionally. So these could be extra components that interface with the rest of Nephio. So early on, I had a kind of vision for Nephio that was very pluggable. This idea that Nephio would be a very opinionated core, but that all the parts of Nephio would be connected via adapters. So even things like GitOps would be an optional adapter that you add to it, right? So a core that has the very basic concepts, but everything is implementable in its own way, right? And we can provide reference implementations that are absolutely usable. But for example, if you want to connect to an external site inventory, which is part of what I would call the East-West interface,
yeah,
right? If you already have a very robust site inventory, and you do, right? Which, well, you wouldn't want Nephio to reduplicate that, right? But you wanted to interface it with some way. Correct. And use
federation
data that's there. Right. So metadata, site IDs, things like that, that could be reusable. So where we stand right now is that Nephio is a bit of an island, right? So these are exactly our concerns regarding these interfaces and APIs. Oh, and I see Ronnie is here. You know, he made some good comments on LinkedIn regarding this. So, yeah, my approach to the future is more decoupling. That's my vision.
Correct.
I was just highlighting someone else's comment in LinkedIn. Just credit where credit is due.
Yeah, we have one more raised hand.
This is beyond a quick question. So looking at this, so I'm just curious about ONAP, for example, has NFEO, and then they are using SOL3 as a northbound interface, and southbound SOL5 for the northbound and SOL3 for southbound. Looks like if we have NFEO and you try to use Nephio as a BNFM in that term, now CNFM. So if we are using SOL3 API, how Nephio gonna take it? They're gonna take it as a CR or take it as a SOL3 API. SOL3 API has its own model and APIs, and create and instantiate, terminate, delete those things. I'm still trying to understand the connection between NFEO and Nephio through the SOL3 API.
Okay, that's the proposal. It's not for R2. It's a long-term big picture on how the evolution of for Nephio APIs could happen for intersection with the rest of the brownfield ecosystem. And my proposal is coming from a service provider's lens, as in we are consuming that. So if I'm currently using Tosca-based templates, which is also HC compliant to develop our NSDs and services that stitches many CNF components and CNF packages together, I use the SOL3 APIs from different VNF managers to basically stitch the various components together. And I'm very familiar with the SOL3 APIs, like you mentioned, instantiate, terminate, and of course, there are more advanced for the lifecycle management as well. Now, if we were to allow Nephio as a layer that is actually deploying the infrastructure, that is actually deploying the CNF, and that's actually deploying the configurations of the CNF, if Nephio is to do all of that, that's exactly the scope of the VNF manager. I don't think that there is a question of keeping the VNF. Okay, when the Kubernetes came, essentially the need for the VNF manager was already killed at that stage. I don't know how we kept that. Somehow, because of a lot of telco requirements, it wasn't just natural for the Kubernetes to become the VNF manager for more complex, more advanced network functions. So To tackle that complexity, we retained the VNF managers, which I understand was the need of that time. Now, Nephew is actually filling in all the gaps of the Kubernetes, at least the way I understand, which were not filled at the time when Kubernetes wasn't enough for all telco networking requirements, like the telco CNF requirements. So if Nephew could become that layer which can fill those gaps and enable Kubernetes to perform as a VNF manager, to me, then that can replace a VNF manager. And in that scenario, we would need to express the SOL 003 APIs for this to become, for this to enable a communication with the upstream systems and make that a pluggable part of your architecture.
Sana, just a good example here. In ONAP a while ago, when VM was used, we use a VNFM following SC. After that, we start using Kubernetes, and then we realize many of the VNFM functionality can be done by Kubernetes natively.
Correct.
So
Correct.
what the ONAP did, we create ASD, application service deployer. What it's doing is we don't need a VNFM heavy duty function, but we have a very lightweight of the CNFM in ONAP we just introduced, very light. Just handling at that time, just handling where to connecting a Helm chart and how to merge the configuration, customize the value for value file and creating config map, and then mixing it. And then we directly calling the Kubernetes through API. So that means that most of the VNFM functionality was replaced by Kubernetes. So that's why that's fine. But looking at this architecture, reintroducing that's why we didn't use SOL3 API, because SOL3 API was too heavy duty for when we're using Kubernetes. So that's why ASD, we don't use SOL3 API. We created very, very light the API, very light, only calling the Helm chart, those things, but not SOL3 API. So that's why once we're using Nephew, which is the kind of a middleman already dedicated for the Kubernetes, that means, to me, NFEO, if we following ASD concept, we don't need even SOL3 APIs. We have very lightweight API because
I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. Just when you said that you were able to replace a lot of the VNF manager heavy duty functionalities and replace that with the thin, lightweight CVNF manager, right. I think I completely agreed with you. And I think when the Kubernetes layer enriches its functionalities more with the Nephew, and when the deployments become more cloud native, like you have functions that are really clearly expressed with your CRDs and operators, even that lightweight CNF need might diminish over time. So the SOL3 APIs is just a reference a label for that. It could be any APIs, like any open APIs that can be consumed by NFEO to be able to stitch those packages and artifacts with the NSDs, which is just a proposal. So SOL3 just means that the label of the interface, but it shouldn't be strictly SOL3 compliant, which I agree with you. It has failed.
That's why it confused me. As soon as you put SOL3 API light, then you're confused. As I repeat again, we make a very lightweight API, but when we're using the Nephew, we don't need that API either. We can reduce further. That's why the NFEO to Nephew connection should be very lightweight. Not like
we could
traditional.
Just use Kubernetes APIs, which are already there. We don't even have to invent new APIs. Like somebody mentioned that as we develop a new CRD, an API is already created for that. It's a matter of exposing and documenting and enabling the upstream systems to know how we can consume that. So which would be very natural evolution of Nephew.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, that's how I'm trusting my comment. That's all. Back to SOL5, understand because outside Nephew. But one confusing these days was Nephew originally tried to handle resource management, and then since we introduced a Nephew management cluster, and then I think that some area architecturally step up into some of the NFEO functions, like stepping into ORAN SMO function. That's why we're a little confused. That's why if they handle some above the CNFM, above the resource, then we have to rethink about the functional demarcation. So SMO, OI, O2, API, we have to clear demarcation functionally. because I think the nephew can grow up that way, doing more than we expected, and might already stepping in. I think the last the architecture they talking about some of the NFU functions. So
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
I agree. Just by nephew saying that it's doing the infrastructure automation and lifecycle management, it's already dealing with a lot of resources, feasibility checks, and resource reservation and resource control, which were considered to be the higher level resource orchestration capabilities and responsibilities. To some of that even discussed in the network slicing 3GPP specs, which is now handled, if it is handling correctly through nephew, then it's handled through some of the nephew logic. So conceptually, that the demarcation point of nephew is actually evolving. It's going to me, the way I understand is that it would be the best place to control your resources and your infrastructure reservation, because that's closest to infrastructure and has a lot of native capabilities where it can naturally control that. But it should actually be able to interact with the rest of the system, so that if there was a logic dependent on the resource reservation in the network slicing or in the service orchestrator, we could leverage that and build that communication between the two streams. I believe that would be a very, very good evolutionary path for that confusion to fix eventually.
So my hand is up, Sana.
Sorry, please chime in,
yeah,
because
sure.
I can't see the hand.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, just adding, everybody said the important things, right? The question is, how do we narrow it down to some decisions over what we can make for R2 and R3 and beyond, right? And actually turn this into milestones that we can achieve. I'll just add a quick engineering perspective. It's you know, where Sol 003 and 005 are very different, right? One is RESTful and one is a declarative API based on Tosca. But generally, Etsy has been kind of, I would say, interesting in that it tried to do both declarative and so-called REST at the same time for different layers. Some people would say that's inconsistent, but that's the reality. You know, a lot of what we try to do in Kubernetes is take things that are not declarative and create a declarative interface on top of them. Here, we're talking about doing the opposite, right? We have a declarative implementation, and we want to create an imperative-ish shim on top of it. That's actually easier, right? So I just want to point out that none of what we're saying here from an engineering perspective is rocket science. These are actually all relatively straightforward. You know, you create a simple state machine to keep track of things. A big part of it is actually having status come back, because APIs, the thing about imperative APIs is that they have a return value, right? So you call something and you expect a result. Did it succeed or fail, and what's the error message? So we have those mechanisms in FEO right now. They just haven't really been, those are part of the Google seed code that hasn't been completely integrated into FEO quite yet, but it is part of our architecture, and it will work. So these things will not be very hard to create, right? It's more about the, you know, slogging through the list of APIs and structures and making sure they're there. And, you know, as Byung-Woo pointed out, you know, we already have that open source work in ONAP, which we can leverage. You know, we can fork or reuse. The license is very friendly to us, of course. So I don't think this will be very challenging for SIG to implement, but it is challenging for us here in SIG 1 to really create a roadmap, set the priorities. Which one is more important, ORAN or Etsy, right? What do we want to focus on? What is the user story? I think there's just a lot to discuss here in this SIG in terms of what we actually want to achieve. Take this diagram and turn it into a plan, right? And that's what we don't have right now.
Correct, correct. So all to your point, the idea for focusing our requirements for R2, I think, was there, which we are working on, which we will be working on. One of the things that we wanted to agree as a result of the R2 discussion was to be able to release some documentation that could establish the understanding of how nephew intersects with the rest of the automation system. And that's something that myself and Kaushik put in this document a long time ago. So I think this effort to discuss what we're discussing today, of course, doesn't mean that we are doing all of it in the R2, but to at least agree on a long-term vision or direction. And even this is evolutionary right now, but to at least have some picture of how we are going to do this incrementally. And I was going to put a long-term view, not an R2, because it's an R2 requirements document. So I didn't want to create that confusion that this whole thing is coming out of R2. And I had some other raised hands here. I feel we could go to them.
There are no raised hands now, but I'll add, this is
Go
really
ahead,
great. So I think this moves our conversation forward. I think we need a second diagram that is specifically about R2, right? This is
Yeah.
more about
Okay.
the general view.
Okay.
And if you like, I could, is this diagram editable?
Yes.
Is it like
Do
embedded?
you work with Visio? I can share the Visio file with you.
I do not. I work with the internal Google diagram tool. So, but yeah, maybe
Which tool? I
can
can paste this there, and then you can edit that if I can do that.
Yeah. So if, inside Google Docs, if you can do insert, I think it's just insert diagram, and then you have all these tools for drawing diagrams, that very similar to this. So
you know, everybody is in G Suite internally within my org, and I am an old school person still stuck with Visio. Somehow I find that so friendly to use. But I'll figure something out so we can co-edit this diagram. I was expecting you could also put some east-west
that's exactly
API.
what I wanted to say. Yeah,
right.
yeah. That I want to add maybe the east-west side of things. Yeah.
Okay, let me figure this out. How to share this in on a Google tool with you. I want to see what do we have.
One thing I'd like to suggest is to avoid having just a single option for any API, because that may alienate the audience that is maybe not supportive of that type of API. So whenever you say Sol3 API, maybe say something or similar or something like that. Or...
yeah, I was going to edit that. So 003/X APIs means it could be any APIs that fills that context.
Yeah,
so,
because as you know, it's almost a religious thing about APIs.
Very religious.
There's no way, there's no one size fits all. So just make it clear that there might be several options. That way you can.
I completely agree. Yeah, we'll edit this diagram. I was already thinking of editing them with when Byong expressed his Sol 003 struggles. And fortunately or unfortunately, HC APIs have never been complete. So every time we are doing an internal integration, so for example, if I'm integrating with a custom VNF manager, surprisingly, only 40% of the Sol 00X APIs are supported and rest are proprietary most of the time. So we're already building a plugin to those 60% proprietary APIs because somehow Sol 3 did not fulfill the requirements for those specific functions that we were to achieve from that VNF manager. So I think that understanding exists. We'll just edit the diagram.
Yeah, same pain. I think that using a nephew, we can significantly simplify the API. But as you said, you already put the dashed mark. So not just Sol3, we have to do something else and do something else. We need to discuss. Yeah.
Correct. If we have no raised hands, Tol, do you have any other points to discuss? Any other questions? I'm going to share this diagram with you just so that you can add whatever is in your head to that, and then we can continue the discussion forward.
No, not really. I think it would be good to maybe represent this on, well, Thursday you're not going to be here. For
next Monday meeting, absolutely. Yeah. I can do that. We need to present this to bigger audience, like refine that and present that to bigger audience so that we can at least start to converge our thinking process on how Nephew is going to intersect with the rest of the world. And of course, this is evolutionary.
I would say try to boil it down to a few options that we can decide together. So for R2 specifically. Right. And I would say, do we want to focus in R2 on ORAN versus Etsy? And if we pick one, then what do we actually want to achieve for that? Can we come up with a simple user story that would demonstrate that, right? We're not trying to do absolutely everything in R2, but we want to have, I call them POCs. It was a difficult, not the great term, but we want to showcase our ability to integrate north, south, east, west, right? So if we can come up with something straightforward together that's achievable in R2, I think that would be great.
Perfect. Perfect.
Ta, one question before moving off this diagram. You think that I have two questions, OR and SMO, do you think they have the working solution now at this time, or they are still working on it?
All of ORAN is a work in progress, right? But I do know, at least from, I haven't delved into this deeply, but from what I read in the press, I keep reading articles about various companies claiming to have implemented ORAN solutions, right? So even though it's a work in progress, there are published documents, of course, and approved documents, and you could build something based on that, even if it's a moving target.
Some vendors have implemented the SMO structure completely, and we have some of those in trials at the moment. They have near time break. They have the functionality of the GVNFM NFVO customized for the RAN video VCO deployment. And the RAN functions are extremely infrastructure heavy, right? Like we had those requirements in the 5G core, but a lot more of those requirements are in the RAN infrastructure. So that SMO component strictly controls that infrastructure component as well. So the SMOs are actually very much available for trials at the moment. Reach out to me offline and I can share a few names because TELUS is very actively working on SMO right now.
Okay, and also I need to talk to Seshu. He's the PTA of the ORAN SMO, OSC SMO.
Okay.
I think he said, I have to check a while ago. He said working on the NFO and then Falcom, and but I don't know what's the current state. Anyway, I'll check with you and then check with him what's going on there. It's ready to integrate with the nephew, or SC perspective, probably SC ONET probably one of the use case for NFVO, and or we can use ORAN SMO. We'll see. I'm gonna check with it too. Okay, thank you.
Excellent, perfect.
One more question. I'm sorry to tell. So the interface and no-span interface, from the nephew. I think you mentioned about imperative and declarative. What's your target? The declarative, that's your target?
Well, I think it depends on us in a community. Do we want to do both SOL 003 and 005? I mean, they're very different.
Different.
Yeah,
I think SOL 005 will not even come in the context of the SU yet. It could be handled by the upstream systems. Yeah.
Yes, that's the above, and then also that's the above to NFU. I don't think NFU are not dealing with the SOL 005 directly.
I think so too.
Yeah.
At least not in the short term. It could be very, very long term when nephew get to that stage.
Right.
Like when it replaces Tosca and all, could be then the stage where it's doing the SOL 005.
So, in a more direct way, I have basically a ready POC. I need to integrate it properly in FEO that adds Tosca support. I think it's as some of I work on this Tosca parser. Open source for a while, and it's very easy to integrate actually. And I created a very kind of simple POC where I take Tosca models and use a pretty straightforward heuristic with some annotations that allow them to be translated into Nefio KRMs. So I see it at this point working with the topology controller, which is a component that that Stephen has been working on mostly. And I think when that's ready to kind of integrate, it would be fairly easy for me to show how you can basically consume Tosca CSARs directly into that. So technically it's easy to do, but I don't have a very clear user story for that. So I think we need to, I think that's what we can come up with here.
Right.
And by the way, I do think,
not R2, but a simple user story for that could be you have a 5G core AMF, SMF, UPF, and now we have video VCUs deployed. Can we create an NSD for that topology to be expressed in Tosca? Could that be a service that I can instantiate from
Potentially,
that
you
layer?
know,
Right.
Tosca is used for two different things, both for network function packaging, right? The NSDs,
Right.
sorry, the NFDs, and then there are the NSDs as well, you know. So I'm thinking more about the NSD layer for now, but
Okay.
that again, it kind of depends which way we want to go. And part of the user story is, well, we would need the Tosca packaging as well, right? Do we want to do Tosca packaging for Free5GC, for example, or do we want to take a different use case? We're going to have open air interface components. You know, you probably already saw the post that they're going to be coming into Nefia, which is amazing and great news. So we have a lot of, you know, if we want to create a specific showcase of ability, there are many avenues we can take.
Right,
yeah.
right, Tol. One quick question about the RAN presentations that I saw on Slack. I had asked one question: does it support open source version of a VDU VCU in that software, the one that is in open source?
So it's a good question. I encourage you just to go to the open air interface site.
I did. I saw the
define-
documentation.
okay.
I just saw I just saw a lot of 5G components like AMF, SMF. I could not see the RAN
The
components in
RAN
that.
components. Yeah,
It just
I
says
will
a
have to
simulator.
ask Cigar. So OAI does have a whole set of RAN components. I don't know which ones. Cigar's
It
focused
says
on.
it uses a simulator. So I don't know if they're using a simulator for the video VCU at the moment, or do they have really some code for the video VCU kind of deployment?
Yeah, may I, Sanay? I can comment on
Please.
that.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Actually, I replied on your post. So we do
Okay.
have a VCU. We have even split and we have F1 split. So that means we have CUCP, CUUP, and then we have a DU. And all of them, they can be used as simulators, but OAI's primary goal is not to just have a simulator, but to have something physical. So the simulators are more functional. Let's say, when I say functional, then it means that you're not going to get something like a really high throughput. So they're really good for functionality, for showing all these splits. But whereas what we are focusing on, we are really focusing on making it work with physical radios, with 7.2 split radios, or let's say also with USRPs, because not everybody going to have 7.2 in our community. So it's also with USRPs. So we have DU, CUCP, and CUUP, everything. And we also have the UE stack.
Okay, perfect. The reason I was asking this question is that we deployed the Free5GC, and we did some community POCs, and we could actually proudly say that there were possibilities for some vendor extensions by using some SDKs to use those for vendor-specific UPF. And this was a very exciting news for a lot of people, even within my organization, to play around with the UPF version using the Free5GC blueprints. Now, I was thinking that if there is a version of the VDU VCUs in the exercise that we are targeting for R2, would that create some opportunities for us to extend those blueprints for commercial versions of the VDU VCUs? That's why I was asking this question. I was very interested to see the answers. And I'm happy that you're saying that there is a version of the VDU VCU that could be used for the Nephew trial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really up for pushing further and making ends. I'm proposing some sort of initial CRDs on intent based at what we can actually do with that.
Right. That's very exciting.
Quick time check. We have a SIG 3 meeting right after this one.
Okay. Tol, I think we'll wrap up here. I'll circle back with you offline how to share this diagram with you, and then I will circle back with Kaushik. Let's just reconvene on the next meeting when we get together. And meanwhile, I will be able to announce on the Slack channel if you're having a Thursday meeting or not. I'll basically circle back with Kaushik on that.
Yeah, I would say that if Kaushik can't make it, maybe we should skip the Thursday meeting and just go to Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sana. I think this really moved us forward.
Thank you so much, Tol. I think it was very interesting and got lots of feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.